Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Fen Talks podcast. On today's episode, we're featuring Daniel Arana, who is a director in our Nogales, Arizona office and primarily practices within the agribusiness sector. Today, we're diving into an awesome topic, something that comes up time and time again, especially with how close Arizona is to the Mexico border. Today, we're talking about cross-border trade with Mexico. So Daniel, really excited to talk a little bit about that today. But before we dive into that, I did a brief introduction as far as who you are, but since you're in Nogales, there's probably a number of people that haven't had the opportunity to meet you face to face or in person or heard a little bit more about your story. So before we dive into this conversation about cross-border trade with Mexico, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about your background?
Sure. So I grew up in Nogales, Arizona, where the economy is based on international trade with Mexico, primarily in the produce industry. So I've always seen the importance and the result of international trade with Mexico. Always been around the produce industry, and I've been fortunate during my legal career to now come back to Nogales and work here and work with clients that have been with our office here in Nogales for many years, and now I've had the opportunity to work with them. And so our typical client is going to be a U.S. Business or distributor, like I said, primarily in the produce industry, because that's the majority of what there is here. And it's a U.S. business, but it's owned by either a foreign company or foreign individuals, mostly from Mexico. And so we really act, and I've had the opportunity to act as kind of the in-house counsel for a lot of those businesses, because they're doing business in a foreign country and they're not familiar with the laws. And so I get to work very closely with them and with their teams here in the U.S. to really help them in all aspects of their business. And that's something really, really great about Fenimore, because we have such a wide range of lawyers that can help with any type of issue that you have in your business. And so it's really been beneficial for our clients, and something that I've really enjoyed, getting to know a lot of the people in the businesses and helping them with their businesses here in the U.S.
So agribusiness is kind of a niche market. I'm just curious, what inspired you to go this direction when practicing law?
I mean, like I said, that's the primary industry here in Nogales, and there's not much growing in the region, but it is one of the primary ports of entry for produce grown in Mexico into the United States. So I would say probably 90% of the industry in Nogales is produce related. So it's just been something I've always been around, and is now something I really enjoy being a part of and helping with.
You mentioned a little bit about the types of companies that you're serving and, how you're almost acting as if you're in-house counsel for a number of them. But would you mind just sharing a little bit more detail as far as some of those situations that you're helping them to work through?
Sure. So my specialty area is in agribusiness, and with regard to international transactions with Mexico, a typical transaction will be a U.S. distributor of produce that wants to distribute produce grown in Mexico. And so we'll help the U.S. distributors set up that contractual relationship with the grower down in Mexico. And if there is lending involved, making sure that loan is properly secured, and really taking advantage of the U.S. laws for the benefit of the client. That would be the typical produce transaction. But more broadly, we can assist with really any industry looking to do business in Mexico, whether it's manufacturing, purchasing, hiring independent contractors, depending on the type of project, making sure that it's structured in the way that provides protection, legal protection from the U.S. perspective. And that could be creating a joint venture in Mexico, or helping somebody buy real property down in Mexico on the coastline is some of the things that we've done. And even on the flip side as well, helping individuals and clients from Mexico that want to do business here in the U.S., setting up entities here in the U.S., making sure those are structured properly. And so it's a wide range, right? But anything really doing business in Mexico, or Mexican businesses doing business here in the U.S.
Great. Well, hey, I appreciate you sharing a little bit more about that background. Well, with that, our number one topic of the day is talking about cross-border trade with Mexico. And I know you have 5 key considerations for our listeners. So would love to dive into that right now. Daniel, what would be number one? What's the number one consideration that you have for our listeners?
Sure. So when I was thinking about this, I kind of thought in the steps that I would counsel somebody to go through as we were setting up a transaction. And I think that it can sometimes be daunting even to start thinking about doing business with an entity in a different country. But I think the first critical piece for setting up a successful cross-border transaction is having effective communication with your counterpart, whether it's in the U.S. or in Mexico. As most people, I'm sure, are aware, the laws in the U.S. and Mexico are very different. And the way of doing business in each country is very different as well. But being able to effectively communicate is key to make sure that everybody understands everybody's expectations in a transaction. And I think here, my experience and being able to speak, read, and write in Spanish, and being able to communicate directly with either an attorney in Mexico or the other party in Mexico in Spanish in their native language really helps to facilitate a transaction. I think really helps both sides feel more comfortable about moving forward, being able to communicate in their native language. And translators are great, and they can be used effectively, but there's always something lost in translation. So I think having an attorney that can represent you, that can speak both languages, gives you a great advantage in setting up a cross-border transaction. So that would be number one, effective communication. And I think the second key consideration is to make sure you do your diligence before you enter into a transaction. And I think this is a key step that a lot of companies miss. In the context of the produce industry, for example, I see a lot of U.S. distributors that don't search for security interests or liens on a grower from Mexico that they're going to be entering into a business relationship with, or they're going to be lending money to them. And because the entity is a grower or an individual in Mexico, there are some nuances regarding where to search and for a security interest. But it's key to understand in order to make an informed business decision about whether to proceed with the transaction. So if this diligence is done beforehand, for example, and we find that this grower has many security interests filed against them for years of loans that they've had from many different companies, kind of raises a red flag to do some additional diligence and maybe ask the grower about those loans, seeing if the loans are still outstanding, amounts, and working through those issues beforehand if they can be resolved. And sometimes, based on that diligence, a client may decide that it's not economically worth pursuing that transaction, but at least with doing that diligence, they're able to, be informed and decide whether they want to proceed with the transaction. So I think that would be the number two consideration in setting up the transaction. And then the next one would be making sure that the transaction is structured properly. And this is where good counsel in the U.S. and the Mexico side is crucial. In a cross-border transaction, you're dealing with the laws of two different countries. So I think having good counsel in the U.S. and in Mexico is crucial to make sure that not only that you're complying with the laws in both countries, but you're using those laws to your benefit, for your economic benefit, and making sure you're structured to take advantage of the laws for you. So for example, in almost all instances from a U.S. law perspective, it's not beneficial for a U.S. entity to do business directly in Mexico because of the registration and reporting requirements, among other considerations. If possible, a U.S. entity will most likely want to want the transaction to occur in the United States and have the laws of the United States govern the transaction, so that U.S. company can then take advantage of the U.S. laws and have access to the U.S. court system, which is much more predictable and efficient than trying to enforce or a business relationship down in Mexico. Structuring the transaction properly is also critical from a tax perspective. The tax laws related to foreign individuals, for example, with business interests and assets in the United States, is very different for U.S. citizens than it is for foreign people doing business in the U.S. So just being careful with those pitfalls and making sure you avoid them because the tax implications can be pretty impactful if not structured properly. And the fourth consideration, I think, is very closely tied to the structure, and it has to do with taking advantage of U.S. laws whenever possible. Of course, the U.S. business has to comply with U.S. laws, even if it's a cross-border transaction. And there are laws specific to certain industries that can really benefit a U.S. client. For example, the IMEX or Maquila program, as it's better known, has great advantages in tax and duties for manufacturing operations done in Mexico. But there are very specific requirements that need to be followed in order to benefit from those laws. And in the produce context, I mentioned the nuances of secured transactions that, when done properly, really increase the ability to collect on a debt from a foreign party if that becomes an issue. And there are treaties and trade programs and many bodies of law that need to be followed. But in order to be able to create that competitive advantage for clients, you need to be able to understand those laws and take advantage of them in setting up those transactions. And I think the final consideration really closely tied to that is to make sure that you stay up on changes in those laws. Just because something has been done one way for many years doesn't always mean that's still the right way to do it. Recently, there have been many changes in the IMEX Maquila program due to reform laws in Mexico. There are constant changes in U.S. laws regarding imports of products from Mexico, especially produce. And even a common practice, which is to have independent contractors in Mexico, that has changed drastically over the last few years because of changes in the laws in Mexico. I think if clients and counsel are not up to date on those changes, they risk losing the advantages that they've enjoyed from setting up that cross-border trade with Mexico. So it's important to keep up to date and informed about those changes. So quick recap on those five considerations. Communication is key. Doing your diligence, structuring the transaction properly, taking advantage of laws, and staying up to date on changes in the law are the 5 key considerations.
Wonderful. We'll really appreciate you taking the time to go in a little bit more detail on all of those items. But if there was just one thing that listeners took away from this conversation, what are you hoping that it would be?
I think that clients that want to take advantage of the resources and opportunities in Mexico shouldn't be afraid to do those things. And I think with good counsel, they can take advantage of those opportunities and really help expand their business and create efficiencies that could really help expand their business and be economically profitable for them.
All right. Well, as we look to wrap up today's conversation, is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, I mean, if there are ever any questions that you may have, even if it's not tied to a specific transaction, but just about questions in general about doing business in Mexico and how to structure things, I'm always available to talk about that and happy to do so. But other than that, Lindsay, I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk about this.
I know individuals can find you on the Fenimore website, www.fenimorelaw.com. They can find your bio and contact information on there, but is there a preferred method of contact for you? Do you prefer they call you, email you?
Sure. I mean, a phone call is always great. It's great to talk to somebody, but if you don't feel comfortable with that or just want to shoot a quick email, we can communicate through email or set up a call that way.
Wonderful. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time to join us for today's conversation on cross-border trade with Mexico.